Elizabeth Whitmore dropped 5 sealed proposals onto Nathaniel Carter's desk and said, "Pick one, anyone. They are all better than last time." He did not look at the documents. He looked at her. "I already have," he said quietly. She stared at him. He was not talking about the proposals. Her hands went cold. If you have ever been the woman everyone overlooked, the one who worked hardest and was chosen last, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Elizabeth Whitmore rode into Harlow County, the sun was already brutal. Virginia, in the summer of 1817, did not forgive weakness. The heat pressed down on the fields like a hand trying to push something underground. The red clay roads cracked. The horses moved slow. And the women of Harlow County stayed indoors behind their curtains, watching the way women with nothing better to do always watched. Elizabeth did not have the luxury of curtains. She had a horse, a saddlebag, and a leather folder thick with documents that had taken her 11 months to prepare. 5 marriage proposals, 5 families, 5 daughters with good names, clean reputations, and enough money to satisfy even the most particular of men. She had done everything right. She always did everything right. That was the problem. The Carter estate sat at the far end of a private road, lined with old oaks so tall they blocked the sky. Elizabeth had been on that road 6 times in the past year. She knew every bend, every rut, every place where the shade disappeared and the heat came back like an insult. She tied her horse at the post, straightened her jacket, tucked the leather folder under her arm, and walked to the front door. The butler Marcus opened it before she knocked. "Miss Whitmore." He stepped aside. "He's expecting you." "He's always expecting me," she said. "That hasn't made things any easier." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Nathaniel Carter was standing at the window when she entered the study. He did not turn around. He had a habit of doing that, standing with his back to the room, like he was daring people to announce themselves. Most people did. Most people cleared their throats and waited, and eventually said something nervous and apologetic. Elizabeth set the folder on his desk, pulled out the chair across from it, and sat down. She waited. After a moment, he turned. Nathaniel Carter was 34 years old, and he looked like a man who had decided a long time ago that comfort was something other people deserved. His face was lean. His jaw was set. His eyes were the kind of dark that didn't reflect light easily. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. "How many this time?" he asked. "5," she said. He crossed the room, sat behind the desk, and opened the folder without enthusiasm. He read the first page, turned it over, read the second, set it aside. Read the third, fourth, fifth, each one slower than the last. Then he closed the folder. Elizabeth kept her hands flat on her knees. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "I have now presented you with 18 women over the course of 11 months. Women with fine families, strong characters, healthy constitutions, and every quality you said you were looking for. I know. You have declined all 18. I know that too. I'm running out of options," she said. "The families are starting to talk. When a man rejects this many proposals, people begin to wonder what the problem is." He looked at her. "And what do they conclude?" "That the problem is you," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. Something closer to recognition. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore." "I am sitting." "Then stop sitting like you're about to leave." She adjusted nothing. "What is wrong with the proposals?" He leaned back. "Nothing." "Nothing." "The women are perfectly acceptable." "Perfectly acceptable," she repeated. "Mr. Carter, Miss Harrington is considered one of the finest matches in the state. Her father owns half the tobacco county between here and Richmond. Miss Delacroix has been educated in 3 languages. Miss Webb, I know their qualifications," he said. "You wrote them yourself." "Then explain to me," she said, "what you are actually looking for. Because I have exhausted every reasonable interpretation of your requirements, and I am beginning to suspect you do not know what you want. Silence. Outside, a mockingbird called once and stopped. Nathaniel Carter folded his hands on the desk and looked at her for a long moment. I want someone who talks to me the way you just did, he said. Elizabeth stared at him. Someone who doesn't flinch, he continued. Someone who doesn't agree with everything I say just because I'm the one paying. Someone who walks into this room and acts like she has every right to be here. That is a description of a professional, Elizabeth said flatly. Not a wife. Maybe I've been confusing the two. She picked up the folder and stood. I'll find you a sixth candidate. Miss Whitmore. She stopped. Sit down. I have other clients. Sit down. His voice wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet that had weight behind it. The kind of quiet that came from a man who rarely needed to raise his voice because things happened when he spoke in any register. Elizabeth sat. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that it stopped feeling like a pause and started feeling like a decision. I hired you 11 months ago, he said. You have come to this house 23 times. You have sat in that chair in that same straight-backed way you're sitting right now, and you have never once asked me for more money, never arrived late, never made an excuse, and never... He paused. Never looked at this house and let me see you wanting it. I'm a professional, she said again. Every other woman who has sat in that chair has looked at the portrait above the fireplace and calculated what it cost, he said. You look at my ledgers. Your ledgers are why I know you've been overcharged for grain storage for the past 3 years. I know. I told you in March. I know that too. You haven't fixed it. I was waiting to see if you'd bring it up again. Elizabeth blinked. That is an absurd way to manage an estate. For the first time since she had walked through the door, something in his face loosened. Not quite a smile, but close. Miss Whitmore, he said. I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it before you argue with me. She said nothing. He took that as permission. I don't want a sixth candidate, he said. I don't want a seventh or an 18th or a 25th. I have been sitting in this house for 5 years since my father died, and I have managed the estate and attended the dinners and done everything a man in my position is supposed to do. I have interviewed women through matchmakers, and I have sat through introductions, and I have smiled at the right moments and said the right things. He stopped. And every single time I come back to this room, and I sit in this chair, and the only conversation I can remember clearly is the one I had with you. The room was very quiet. That's a function of professional familiarity, Elizabeth said. Is it? Yes. We've spoken more than 20 times. It would be strange if... I asked Marcus to clear my afternoon the last 4 times you came, he said. I don't do that for anyone else. She looked at him. He looked back. Mr. Carter? Her voice was careful. Very careful. The way a person speaks when they're walking near the edge of something and they know it. I am the daughter of a minister from Piedmont County. I have $16 to my name and a rented room above a printer's shop. I am employed to find suitable matches for families with means. I am not, she stopped. I am not what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, he said. I'm telling you. Then you're telling me something that can't be done. Why not? Because your neighbors would call it a scandal, she said. Because your business associates would question your judgment. Because the families whose daughters you've already rejected would take it as a personal insult. Because Caroline Hastings has been telling everyone in the county for 3 months that she expects your proposal and her father is your largest trading partner. I know all of that. Then you know why it's impossible. He leaned forward. I know why it's difficult, he said. That's not the same thing. Elizabeth did not accept. She thanked him, gathered her folder, and left the estate with the same composed efficiency she had arrived with. She rode back into town at a steady trot. She did not let the horse slow down. She did not let herself think until she was back in her room with the door latched and the window shut, and the afternoon heat pressing against the glass like it was trying to get in. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and put her face in her hands. Not because she was sad, because she was terrified of how much she had wanted to say yes. Yeah, she had come to Harlow County 3 years ago with a letter of introduction and a skill set nobody had thought to value. Her father, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, had spent his life among people who had nothing. He had also spent his life teaching his daughter that a ledger told the truth that people tried to hide. Money moved the way water moved toward the lowest point, the weakest seam. If you knew how to read the numbers, you knew who was afraid and who was lying and who was one bad season away from ruin. Elizabeth had read ledgers since she was 12. By the time she was 20, she was managing the accounts for 4 families in Piedmont County. By the time she was 23, one of those families had referred her to a cousin in Richmond, who had referred her to a friend in Charlottesville, who had eventually sent her to Harlow County with a note that said, "Miss Whitmore has a gift for making sense of things." She had built her practice one family at a time. Matching was not what she had planned. But the Alderton family had asked her to evaluate 3 potential matches for their eldest son, and she had done it with the same systematic attention she brought to everything, and the son had married the second woman on the list and been happy about it, which was more than most arranged situations achieved. Word traveled. By the end of her first year in Harlow County, Elizabeth Whitmore had a small, quiet, deeply unofficial practice in what she called practical matching. She reviewed candidates. She interviewed families. She assessed character resources, temperament and compatibility with the same rigor she applied to financial records. She was good at it. She was good at reading people the way she read numbers, finding the truth beneath the presentation. The one person she had never been able to read clearly was Nathaniel Carter. He sent a note the next morning. It arrived before 7, brought by one of his stable hands, a boy named Caleb, who was missing one front tooth and always looked vaguely apologetic about it. "Miss Whitmore, I understand your hesitation. I am not asking you to decide today. I am asking you to continue your work at the estate through the end of the summer. Come and go as you need to. Manage the accounts. Speak to the tenants. Do what you do. And if at the end of the summer you still believe what you said yesterday, I will accept it and ask you to recommend a 7th candidate. I am not a man who pressures women into choices. I am a man who believes in giving an argument time to make itself. N. Carter. Elizabeth read it twice. She read the postscript 3 times. The grain storage situation has been corrected. You were right. You usually are. She folded the letter, put it in the drawer under her account books. Then she sat at her small desk, opened her ledger, and stared at the numbers without seeing them for a very long time. She went back to the estate on Thursday. Because there were accounts to review, because 3 tenant families were behind on their agreements, and she had been asked to assess whether the terms were realistic. Because the summer was nearly half gone, and there was work to do. That was what she told herself. Nathaniel was not in the main house when she arrived. Marcus led her to the estate office, a separate building behind the main house, and told her the quarterly records were on the second shelf. The correspondence was filed by county, and Mr. Carter was in the south field and would return by midday. Elizabeth opened the quarterly records. She found 6 discrepancies in the first hour. 3 were careless. 2 were suspicious. 1 was a systematic pattern of small overcharges on supplies that added up over 3 years to a sum that made her jaw tighten. Someone had been stealing from him slowly, small enough not to trigger alarm, large enough to matter. She was still tracing the pattern when the door opened and Nathaniel came in. He stopped when he saw her face. "What did you find?" he asked. She turned the ledger toward him and pointed. He looked at the figures. His expression didn't change, but she had learned to read the stillness in him, the way she read stillness in numbers, the flatness that meant something was being held very carefully. "Henderson," he said, "your supply manager." "How long?" 3 years, possibly longer if the records before that are as poorly kept as these suggest. She paused. "Do you want me to document it formally?" Yes. For legal purposes. Yes. She nodded. That'll take a few days. Take what you need. He pulled the second chair to the desk and sat beside her. Not across from her, beside her. Like a colleague. Show me where it starts. For the next 2 hours, they worked through the records together. He asked sharp questions. He remembered numbers. He did not make excuses for the gaps in oversight, did not blame his managers or the complexity of the estate, or the demands on his time. He simply looked at what the numbers said and asked what came next. At one point their hands were both on the same ledger page, and she realized how close he was, and she moved her hand first. He didn't say anything, but she felt him notice. By noon, they had a clear picture. By 1 o'clock, she had outlined the documentation she would need. By 2, Marcus had brought food cornbread and cold chicken and a pitcher of water, and Nathaniel had pushed the ledgers aside to make room and said, "Eat something, Miss Whitmore. You've been at this since dawn." I arrived at 8. Dawn adjacent. She looked at him. There it was again, that almost smile. The one she had been cataloging without realizing she was cataloging it. She took a piece of cornbread. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You usually just ask. Why did you wait 3 years to act on the grain overcharging?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know about it." "You suspected." Another pause. "I suspected something was off. I didn't have the numbers." "You could have hired someone sooner." "I know." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her directly. "Because I didn't trust anyone." The word sat between them. Anyone. "And now?" she asked. He held her gaze. "I reckon that's changed some," he said quietly. Elizabeth looked back down at her cornbread. She did not say, "I don't know what to do with that." She did not say, "You are making this very difficult." She did not say anything at all, because some things once said couldn't be taken back, and she was not ready for that. Not yet. The trouble arrived as trouble usually did from the direction no one was watching. Caroline Hastings came to call on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Elizabeth had begun her extended engagement at the Carter estate. Elizabeth was in the estate office alone. Nathaniel had ridden out to meet with a neighboring landowner about water rights when she heard the carriage on the gravel drive. She went to the window. Caroline Hastings was 29 years old and had never once in her life arrived anywhere quietly. She descended from her carriage the way a general descended from a horse, like the ground should feel honored. She was beautiful. Elizabeth had always been able to acknowledge that without feeling anything about it. Dark hair, pale skin, a posture that announced itself before she spoke. She wore green silk in the middle of a workday in summer, which told Elizabeth everything about how she spent her mornings. Caroline did not go to the main house. She came to the office. Elizabeth did not move from the window. She watched Caroline walk across the yard with a small smile already arranged on her face, and she felt the first real thread of unease she had allowed herself in weeks. The door opened without a knock. "Miss Whitmore?" Caroline looked around the office with the expression of someone examining something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. "I heard you were spending a great deal of time here." "I have an ongoing engagement with Mr. Carter's accounts," Elizabeth said. "It's professional work." "Of course it is." Caroline stepped further into the room. Her eyes moved over the ledgers, the papers the 2 chairs pushed close together at the desk. "Professional." Elizabeth said nothing. "I want to be kind to you," Caroline said. Her voice was the kind that wasn't. "I know your situation. I know you came here with very little. I know that a man like Nathaniel Carter must seem—" "Miss Hastings," Elizabeth's voice was level. "I manage his accounts. I assess his ledgers. I have identified and documented a significant fraud against his estate. That is the scope of my work here. If you have concerns about Mr. Carter's business arrangements, I suggest you raise them with him directly." Caroline looked at her. The smile thinned. "You're very composed," she said. "For someone in your position." "My position requires composure." "And what position is that exactly?" Caroline tilted her head. "Because the county is starting to ask questions. A woman with your—" She paused, background spending this much time in a bachelor's home without a chaperone. "I am here to work," Elizabeth said. "The same way a lawyer comes to work, or a physician, or anyone else hired for professional services." "But you're not a lawyer," Caroline said softly, "or a physician. You're a woman, and people will talk about you the way they talk about women, regardless of what you intend." Elizabeth held her gaze. "Is that a warning?" she asked. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "From making a mistake that costs you everything you've built." Elizabeth looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Hastings," she said, "I appreciate your concern. I'll take it under consideration." She turned back to the ledger. After a moment, she heard the door close. She sat very still. Her hands were completely steady, but her heart was not. Nathaniel returned 2 hours later. He came into the office and found her still at the desk, and he read her expression the way she had learned to read his. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing." "Miss Whitmore." She set down her pen. "Miss Hastings paid a visit." Something hardened in his jaw. "What did she say?" "She offered a warning about the nature of my time here, about what the county might conclude." He was quiet. "She's not wrong," Elizabeth said, "about the talk. People are already—" "I don't care what people say. You should," she said. "Because I do. Not for my own vanity, Mr. Carter. Because my livelihood depends on my reputation. Because every family who has trusted me with their accounts and their children's futures trusted me based on the understanding that I am a professional of unimpeachable character." She paused. "If that character becomes a subject of gossip, I lose everything. Not just here, everywhere." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then let me do something about it," he said. "What can you do? Something that settles the question permanently." She stared at him. "No," she said. "Elizabeth." It was the first time he had used her first name. They both heard it. He didn't apologize for it. She didn't correct him. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the desk between them, and she thought, "This is the most dangerous moment I have been in since I arrived in Harlow County. Not because of Caroline Hastings, not because of the county talk, but because I am sitting here looking at this man, and I am running out of reasons." "Give me the summer," he said quietly. "That's all I asked. Give me the summer, and at the end of it, you decide." She looked at her hands. "You're making this very difficult," she said. "I know. That doesn't seem to bother you." "No, ma'am," he said. "It doesn't." She picked up her pen. "The Henderson documentation will be ready by Friday," she said. And she did not look up. But for the first time in 11 months of professional composure, her hand was not entirely steady. The Henderson documents were delivered on a Friday morning as promised. Elizabeth rode to the estate with a sealed folder thick enough to matter in any county court in Virginia. She had spent 3 days on it, cross-referenced every figure, dated every discrepancy, written the summary in language clean enough that even a judge who had never managed a farm in his life could follow the trail of money from where it belonged to where it had gone. She was proud of the work. She did not let herself be proud of much, but she let herself have that. Marcus took her to the main house this time, not the office. Nathaniel was at the breakfast table with 2 men she did not recognize. He stood when she entered, which was not something men in his position always remembered to do, and said, "Gentlemen, this is Miss Whitmore. She manages my accounts." One of the men, older with the kind of face that had spent decades deciding things, looked at her with open assessment. "The matchmaker, among other things," Nathaniel said. His voice was even. Elizabeth placed the folder on the table. "The Henderson documentation. Everything you'll need to pursue it formally if you choose to." Nathaniel opened it without sitting back down. He read the first page, then the summary at the back, then looked up. "This is thorough," he said. "That's the job. The older man reached across the table. May I? Nathaniel handed it to him. The man read for a moment, then let out a slow breath through his nose. You found all of this in 3 days. I found the pattern in one afternoon, Elizabeth said. The documentation took 3 days. The man looked at Nathaniel. Where did you find her? She found me, Nathaniel said. Elizabeth picked up her saddlebag. I'll send my invoice at the end of the week. Is there anything else before I go? Stay, Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. It also wasn't the kind of order that expected argument. It was something in between the voice of a man who was trying very hard not to sound like he was asking too much. She stayed. The two men, a county magistrate named Aldridge and his clerk, spent the next hour reviewing the documents with Nathaniel. Elizabeth sat at the far end of the table and answered questions when they were directed at her, which was more often than she expected. The magistrate had a sharp mind, and he used it, and somewhere in the middle of the third set of questions, he stopped looking at her like she was an accessory to the conversation and started looking at her like she was the center of it. Henderson's still on the property, Aldridge asked. He resigned 2 weeks ago, Nathaniel said. I gave him the opportunity to leave quietly. I didn't know then how much there was. With this documentation, Aldridge said, tapping the folder, you have grounds to pursue civil recovery, possibly criminal, depending on the county attorney's appetite. He looked at Elizabeth. Would you be willing to present this testimony formally if it comes to that? She looked at Nathaniel. He said nothing. He was leaving it to her. Yes, she said. If it comes to that. Aldridge nodded. Good. Then we'll begin the formal review next week. He closed the folder. Mr. Carter, you have a very capable woman managing your affairs. I know it, Nathaniel said. He said it simply, not as a compliment thrown to a room, as a fact he had established long ago and saw no reason to dress up. Elizabeth looked at the window. The magistrate and his clerk left before noon. The estate went quiet the way it always did after visitors like a held breath released. Elizabeth was packing her saddlebag in the front hall when Nathaniel came out of the study. Walk with me, he said. I have appointments this afternoon. Half an hour. She looked at him. He looked back. She left her saddlebag by the door. They walked out through the back of the house toward the north field where the summer corn stood high and the air smelled like heat and green things and red clay. The mockingbird from the oak tree was going again. It always was. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes. It was one of the things she had noticed about him early. He did not feel the need to fill silence. Most people did. Most people got nervous when a conversation paused and rushed to fill it with noise. Nathaniel let silence be silence. It was a quality she respected almost against her will. You did good work on that documentation, he said finally. Thank you. I mean it. Aldridge doesn't compliment easily. I noticed. Another few steps. Can I ask you something? He said. You usually just ask. He almost smiled. She heard the echo of her own words from weeks ago coming back through his mouth and felt something shift in her chest, the particular discomfort of being known. What would it take? He said. She didn't pretend not to understand. Mr. Carter. Nathaniel. She stopped walking. He stopped 2 steps ahead and turned back to face her. What would it take, he said again, for you to consider it seriously? Not as a professional question, not as a social calculation, as a personal one. The corn moved in a slow wind. A fly buzzed somewhere near the tree line. Elizabeth looked at the ground for a moment, then back at him. I don't know if I trust it, she said. That's honest. I know it's honest. I'm asking why. Because men in your position don't choose women in mine, she said. And when they appear to, there is usually a reason that has nothing to do with the woman. She paused. A man who needs a reason, a practical one, to justify a choice he's already made for other purposes. Something moved through his eyes. Not anger. Something older. You think I want you for something practical, he said. I think it's possible. What would I want? She met his gaze. Someone who can manage your affairs without the cost of a full household staff. Someone whose gratitude and dependence might make her easier to manage than a woman with her own standing. Someone— "Stop!" he said. His voice was quiet. Very quiet. She stopped. "You reckon I'm that man?" he said. "I reckon I can't afford to be wrong," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that worked through something instead of past it. "That's fair," he said finally. She hadn't expected that. "What?" "I said that's fair," he repeated. "You've been careful your whole life because you had to be. Every decision you make costs more than it costs me because you don't have the cushion that money gives. If you're wrong about me, you lose your reputation, your livelihood, everything you built." He paused. "If I'm wrong about you, I'm embarrassed at a few dinner parties." She stared at him. "I understand why you don't trust it," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust it yet. I'm asking you to stay through the summer and let me show you I'm not that man." The mockingbird called again from the oak. Elizabeth looked at the corn. "You said that already," she said. "In the letter." "I know. And I said I'd consider it." "And have you?" She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough for both of them. The talk started, the way talk always started in Harlow County, quietly, and from more than one direction at once, so that by the time you heard it clearly, it had already been everywhere. Elizabeth first noticed it at the dry goods store on a Tuesday morning. She had come to pick up ink and paper, and the woman behind the counter, Mrs. Pruitt, who had 3 daughters and opinions about everything, was speaking to someone in a lowered voice that stopped when Elizabeth walked in. The pause lasted half the second. Mrs. Pruitt smiled. "Miss Whitmore, what can I get for you?" Elizabeth told her. Mrs. Pruitt filled the order. The conversation resumed on other topics. But Elizabeth had caught the particular quality of that pause, the kind that meant the interrupted subject was still in the room, just wearing different clothes. She did not ask. She paid for her supplies and left. On Thursday, she heard it more directly. She had stopped at the Alderton house to drop off a revised summary of their youngest son's financial standing. He was hoping to court the Morrison girl, and the father had asked for an honest assessment, and Mrs. Alderton had invited her to sit and take tea, with an expression that meant the tea was secondary. "I want to say something as a friend," Mrs. Alderton said. "You can say it," Elizabeth said. "People are talking about the time you spend at Carter Estate." "I know. It isn't kind talk." "I know that too." Mrs. Alderton set down her cup. She was a decent woman, not a warm one, but decent. She looked at Elizabeth the way people looked when they genuinely did not want to deliver what they were about to deliver. "Caroline Hastings told the Whitfield sisters that you've been trying to place yourself," she said. "That the matchmaking was a pretense." Elizabeth said nothing. "The Whitfield sisters told their mother. Their mother told—" Mrs. Alderton stopped. "It doesn't matter who told whom. The point is that people are saying you engineered your time at the estate, that you identified him as a prospect and made yourself indispensable to make him—" "Mrs. Alderton." Elizabeth's voice was even. "I was hired to find Mr. Carter suitable matches. I did that work honestly. I was then engaged to review estate accounts, which I have also done honestly, and in the course of which I uncovered a 3-year pattern of financial fraud against his estate. A county magistrate is now pursuing that case. The work was legitimate." "I believe you," Mrs. Alderton said. "But you're telling me anyway." "Because belief and what people say are 2 different things," Mrs. Alderton said. "And you know that better than I do." Elizabeth finished her tea. She thanked Mrs. Alderton for the warning. She rode back to her room above the printer's shop and sat at her desk and did not open a single ledger for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about the 18 women she had presented. She thought about the way Nathaniel had pushed every proposal back across the desk. She thought about what that looked like to someone watching from outside. She thought about how the story sounded even to her from the outside. And she thought about the fact that it was already too late to make it sound different. She told Nathaniel on Saturday. She didn't intend to. She had ridden out to the estate to review the updated supply records. Henderson's replacement had started the week before a cautious young man named Briggs, who asked good questions and wrote everything down, and she had meant to keep the visit brief and professional. But Nathaniel took one look at her when she walked into the office and said, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "Miss Whitmore." She set down her saddlebag. She looked at the ledgers on the desk. She thought about 17 different ways to say it that were professional and measured and revealed nothing. "The county is talking," she said. "About this, about us. Caroline Hastings told people that I engineered my time here, that I manufactured a reason to stay close to you in order to—" She stopped. "In order to position myself." He didn't look surprised. "I know," he said. She stared at him. "You know, Henderson told me before he left. He'd heard it from someone at the Hastings house. And you didn't tell me." "I was going to." "When?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I had a better answer for you." She looked at him for a long moment. The frustration was there. She was honest enough to feel it, but underneath it was something more complicated. Because what he had just said was not an excuse. It was a man who knew he was losing ground and was trying to find solid footing before he fell. She pulled out the chair and sat down. "It's going to get worse," she said. "Before it gets better, if it gets better, you know that." "Yes?" "My reputation. I know. If this continues, whatever this is, and it doesn't resolve the way you—" She stopped, took a breath. "I lose my professional standing regardless of the outcome. If you decide you've made a mistake, I am the woman who threw herself at the wealthiest man in the county and failed. If you don't make a mistake, I am still the woman who caught him by making herself useful." She looked at the desk between them. "Either version destroys what I've built." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the summer moved through the trees. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer." He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, his hands clasped, the posture of a man who was not going to let himself look away from something hard. "I'll make a statement to the county," he said, "formally, that you were engaged for legitimate professional services, that you identified a significant fraud against my estate, that the engagement was conducted with complete propriety. That won't stop the talk, no, but it'll change what the talk costs you." He paused. "The families who matter, the ones who'd actually withdraw their business from you, they'll hear it from me directly. Aldridge will back it. The magistrate's office carries weight." Elizabeth looked at him. "You do that," she said. "I'd do that and more." "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because I'm the reason you're in this position," he said, "and I'm not the kind of man who lets a woman carry damage I caused." The afternoon was very still. She looked at her hands. She thought about all the words she had for keeping distance. The professional language, the careful phrasing, the ledgers she kept between herself and anything that felt like wanting. She had been keeping those ledgers since she was 12 years old, since her father died and left her with skill and nothing else, and she had learned very quickly that skill meant survival only if reputation stayed intact. "All right," she said. He looked at her carefully. "All right," she said again. "Make the statement." He nodded once. "And then," she stopped. "And then," he said. "And then we see," she said. "That's all. We see." It was the most she had given him. They both knew it. He didn't push. He pulled the record books toward him and said, "Show me what Briggs did with the supply accounts this week." And she did. Who? Nathaniel's statement went out the following Monday. He sent letters to 7 families personally, the ones who commanded the most opinion in Harlow County. He also spoke to Aldridge, who confirmed to anyone who asked that Miss Whitmore's professional conduct had been exemplary, and her contribution to the fraud investigation invaluable. For a week, it seemed to work. The talk quieted. Not entirely, but enough that Elizabeth could walk into the dry goods store without Mrs. Pruitt's particular pause. Enough that two families she had been uncertain about sent notes confirming their continued engagement of her services. She told herself it was enough. She was wrong. The Whitfield dinner party was the largest gathering in Harlow County that summer, and it happened on the second Saturday of August. Elizabeth had not planned to attend. She was not the kind of woman who moved easily in those rooms. Not because she lacked the manners or the dress or the ability to make conversation, but because rooms like that were engines of social positioning, and she had spent her professional life staying out of the machinery. But Mrs. Alderton asked her personally, and Mrs. Alderton was one of the 7 families Nathaniel had written to, and declining would look like hiding. She wore her good blue dress, the one she saved for formal occasions. She arrived at 7. Nathaniel was already there. He saw her across the room the moment she entered the way she was beginning to understand. He always saw her across rooms, and something in his posture shifted, not conspicuously, not in a way that would be noticed by anyone, not watching, but she noticed. She took a glass of lemonade and found a comfortable position near the windows. Caroline Hastings found her 20 minutes later. "Miss Whitmore." Her voice carried that same surface warmth it always did, like a stone that had been sitting in the sun, warm to the touch, cold underneath. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Mrs. Whitfield invited me." "Of course she did." Caroline stood beside her facing the room. The performance of 2 women having a pleasant conversation. "I heard Mr. Carter made quite a declaration on your behalf. He clarified the nature of my professional engagement." "Is that what he called it?" Elizabeth looked at her directly. "What would you call it, Miss Hastings?" Caroline smiled. A real one this time, not warm, but honest in its sharpness. "I'd call it a man protecting an investment," she said. "He's put effort into you, time, letters. He doesn't want to see that wasted." "You think he's protecting a business arrangement?" "I think men like Nathaniel Carter don't write personal letters to 7 county families over a bookkeeper." She kept her voice light, conversational, the kind of voice that could be overheard and sound innocent. "I think you've made yourself very useful to him, and he'd rather keep the arrangement comfortable." "And I think," Elizabeth said just as lightly, "that you're telling me this because you're afraid." Something flickered in Caroline's eyes. "Afraid," she repeated. "Afraid that Nathaniel Carter has looked at everything available to him in this county, everything society has offered, including everything you represent, and found it insufficient." She paused. "That's the part that troubles you most. Not me. That his standards turned out to be different than you expected." The room moved around them. Someone laughed across the hall. A fiddle started up in the next room. Caroline looked at her for a long moment. "You should be very careful," she said softly. "I usually am," Elizabeth said. Caroline moved away. Elizabeth turned back to the window. Her hands, held carefully at her sides, were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the effort of holding that much ground. Nathaniel appeared at her elbow 10 minutes later. "What did she say?" he asked. "Nothing I couldn't answer." He looked across the room at Caroline, who was now speaking to her father, with an expression Elizabeth could not read from this distance. "Her father came to see me Thursday," he said. Elizabeth turned to look at him. "Mr. Hastings." What did he want? Nathaniel's jaw was set in that particular way it got when he was holding something controlled. "He came to remind me that the trading agreement between our families has been profitable for 12 years, and that it might be less profitable if you continued to direct your personal attention somewhere he found unsuitable." Something like that. She looked at him. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I appreciated the reminder." He paused. "And that the terms of any trading agreement and the decisions of my personal life were separate matters, and I'd be happy to discuss one, but not both." And he left angry. Elizabeth breathed out slowly. Nathaniel. It was the first time she had used his name directly. He heard it. She pressed on. "This is becoming. I know what it's becoming. Your business. The Hastings account is 15% of my tobacco trade," he said. I've already spoken to 2 buyers in Richmond. I can replace it within 6 months. She stared at him. You looked for replacements. Before I told him to leave. You were certain he'd... I was certain I wasn't going to let him make that argument effective. He looked at her steadily. I told you I wasn't asking you to trust it. I was going to show you I wasn't that man. That's what showing looks like. The fiddle in the next room had found its rhythm. Other instruments had joined it. The floorboards were beginning to carry the vibration of dancing. Elizabeth looked at the floor. She looked at the window. She looked everywhere. That was not his face for a long moment, because his face had become a place where she found things she was not ready to name. I'm not ready, she said, to say what you want me to say. I know. I'm still... She stopped. I'm still working it out. I know that too. You're very patient, she said, for a man who gets what he wants. I don't always get what I want, he said. I'm learning to work harder for the things worth having. She looked at him then. The room, the music, the Whitfield house, the county, and all its opinions, it fell back for just a moment. Just long enough for something that had been carefully closed to open a fraction like a door in a windless room shifted by a change in pressure from somewhere far off. Dance with me, he said quietly. Just once. If anyone is watching and everyone is watching, let them see something true. What's true? She said. That I'd rather stand next to you than anyone else in this room, he said. That's true. She looked at him. The music pulled at them from the next room. Simple and steady. She said once. He offered his hand. She took it, and the county watched and the talk resumed by morning, and Caroline Hastings left the party early, and none of it was settled. Not one piece of it, but for 3 minutes. In the Whitfield house on an August evening, Elizabeth Whitmore let herself stop calculating and simply stood where she was. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. And it felt against every warning she had given herself like the first honest thing in a very long time. The morning after the Whitfield party, Elizabeth received 2 letters. The first was from Mrs. Alderton, brief and warm. You handled yourself with grace. Several people remarked on it, including people whose opinion I know you value. The second had no signature. It was 4 lines written in a careful hand she did not recognize. Miss Whitmore. You would do well to remember that a woman who rises above her station draws attention from those who intend to correct it. Consider whether what you are reaching for is worth what it will cost the people who have trusted you. Some arrangements once disturbed cannot be restored. She read it twice. She folded it. She did not throw it away because it was the kind of thing that needed to be kept. She went to the estate. She showed it to Nathaniel without comment. He read it. His face did not change, but his hands, which had been relaxed on the desk, flattened and went very still. Do you know who wrote it? She asked. Not yet, he said. I will. His voice was the quiet kind, the kind with weight. There's more here than Caroline's pride, Elizabeth said. Someone is afraid of something specific, not just the social disruption. He looked at her. The estate accounts, she said slowly. Henderson was stealing from you for 3 years. The documentation I built is strong enough to pursue criminal charges. If the county attorney moves forward... She paused. Is Henderson working with someone who still has standing to lose? Nathaniel went very still. I had the same thought, he said. 2 days ago. And you didn't tell me. I was waiting until I was certain. She looked at him. He looked back. You have to stop doing that, she said. Waiting until you're certain before you tell me things. Old habit? Break it, she said. If we are... She stopped, started again. If we are going to... Another stop. The words were harder than she expected. If this is what I think it might be becoming, then you cannot keep information from me to protect me. I need to know what I'm walking into. Something shifted in his face. Not the almost smile. Something deeper and more careful. All right, he said. All right. I'll tell you when I know things, he said, even when I'm not certain yet. She nodded once. "Good," she said. She picked up the ledger. She did not say, "That is the first promise you have made me." She did not say, "I am keeping track." She did not say, "I notice everything." But she did. She always had. And for the first time since she had walked into Carter Estate with 5 sealed proposals and a professional heart, she let herself believe that perhaps the keeping track was finally pointing somewhere worth going. Outside, the summer corn swayed in the heat. Inside, 2 people sat at a desk covered in numbers and threats, and the particular complicated silence of something that had not yet been named, but was undeniably, inconveniently, irrevocably real. The anonymous letter sat in Elizabeth's desk drawer for 4 days before she stopped thinking about it every hour and started thinking about it only every few hours, which was as close to peace as she was going to get. She worked. That was what she did when the ground shifted. She worked harder and faster and with more precision than the situation required, because precision was the one thing that had never failed her. Numbers did not gossip. Ledgers did not change their story based on who was watching. A column that balanced on Monday still balanced on Friday, regardless of what the county was saying about the woman who added it up. Briggs, the new supply manager, turned out to be genuinely capable once he stopped being nervous around her. She had spent an afternoon walking him through Henderson's filing system, what remained of it after the fraud had been extracted, and he had asked good questions and taken thorough notes, and by the end of the week, the supply records were cleaner than they had been in 3 years. Nathaniel noticed. He said so briefly, the way he said most things without preamble or decoration. "Briggs told me you spent 4 hours with him Tuesday. He said you didn't make him feel stupid once." "Why would I make him feel stupid? Most people in your position would." She had looked up from the quarterly summary. "He's trying to do the job right. That's all I need from someone." Nathaniel had looked at her for a moment. With that expression, she was learning to read the one that meant he was storing something away. Filing it, the way she filed numbers. She had looked back down at her work, but she had felt it. She was always feeling things now that she used to be able to not feel. It was deeply inconvenient. On the 5th day after the letter, the second one arrived. Caleb brought it the stable boy with the missing tooth, and he handed it to her at the front gate of the estate with an apologetic look that meant he had not been told what was in it, but suspected it was not good news. This one was longer. Same hand. Same careful, deliberate script. "Miss Whitmore, you have been warned once. The families who trust you with their accounts and their children's futures do so on the basis of your reputation for discretion and propriety. If it becomes known that you have conducted yourself in a manner unsuitable to your position, specifically, that you danced publicly with Mr. Carter at the Whitfield gathering, and have spent unchaperoned hours in his private study on no fewer than 11 occasions this summer, those families will have no choice but to reconsider their arrangements with you. I am not your enemy. I am telling you what is coming so you can make a wiser choice while you still can. Leave Harlow County. Return to Piedmont or Richmond, or wherever a woman of your abilities can rebuild without the damage that is coming if you stay." She read it standing at the gate. She read it again. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket and walked into the estate office without her hands shaking, which was a victory she would give herself later and not now. She sat at the desk. She took out both letters and laid them side by side. She looked at them the way she looked at ledgers, looking for the pattern, the truth beneath the presentation. Same hand both times, which meant one person. A person who was educated. The vocabulary was precise, the construction careful. A person who had access to specific information, the number of times she had been at the estate, unchaperoned 11. That was a number only someone watching closely would have. A person who wanted her gone, but did not want to be seen wanting it. And a person who was underneath the threat afraid. She thought about what Nathaniel had said. Is Henderson working with someone who still has standing to lose? She pulled the estate's correspondence file toward her and started reading. She found it in 2 hours. Not the letter writer, not yet, but the shape of something that explained why the pressure was building now, specifically now, at this particular moment in August. 3 weeks earlier, a letter had arrived from the county attorney's office confirming they were moving forward with the Henderson case. The case would be heard at the September county session. Henderson would be required to appear. And anyone who had done business with Henderson in the relevant period, anyone who had received goods or payments that could be traced to the fraudulent accounts, would be subject to inquiry. Elizabeth sat with that letter for a long time. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in the main house in the library, which he used for personal correspondence. She knocked once and came in without waiting, which she had started doing 2 weeks ago, and he had never once objected to. He looked up. "Who did business with Henderson?" she said. He set down his pen. "Besides me," she said. "Who else received goods from Henderson's supply arrangements? Who had a financial relationship with him that they would not want examined?" Nathaniel was quiet. "You already know," she said. "I suspected." "Tell me." He leaned back. "Henderson managed supply arrangements for 3 estates besides mine. He sourced goods, grain, timber equipment, and negotiated prices across all 4 properties. It was more efficient. Or that was the argument." "Which 3 estates?" He named them. Elizabeth processed each one. "The Whitfield farm," she said slowly. "The Alderton properties, and—" She stopped. "And Randolph Hastings," Nathaniel said. The room was very quiet. "Caroline's father," Elizabeth said. "Yes." "The man who came to you last week and reminded you about 12 years of profitable trade." "Yes." "And if the county attorney's inquiry extends to his involvement with Henderson, he loses significantly more than a trading partnership," Nathaniel said. "His reputation, possibly his seat on the county commission. Depending on what the records show, possibly his freedom." Elizabeth looked at the letters in her hand. She held them out. He took them, read them both, slowly and completely. His face, when he finished, was very still. "This is from him," Elizabeth said. "Or someone acting for him." "Yes." "He's not trying to protect Caroline's romantic interests," she said. "He's trying to protect himself. I'm the one who built the documentation. I'm the one who will likely testify. If I leave Harlow County before September, the case weakens," Nathaniel said, significantly. They looked at each other. "He's not going to stop at letters," Elizabeth said. "No," Nathaniel said. "He's not." She should have felt afraid. She had told herself later, replaying the conversation, that the correct response to that moment was fear. That a sensible woman, a woman with a rented room and $16 and a professional reputation that was the only thing standing between her and nothing, would have felt the cold settle in and the practical mind start calculating exits. She did not feel afraid. She felt angry. It was a clean anger. The kind that came not from being hurt, but from being underestimated. Randolph Hastings had looked at her, had assessed the weight of her in the world. No family connections, no money, no husband, no property, and had concluded she was a problem that could be solved with an unsigned letter. That she was the kind of woman who could be managed with a threat and a reminder of her smallness. He had made a mistake. She had been managing herself against that calculation her entire life. She had learned to read ledgers specifically because ledgers told the truth about who had power and who only thought they did. And the truth the ledgers were telling her now was that Randolph Hastings was not powerful. He was afraid. And afraid, men made mistakes because they moved too fast and too hard and stopped reading the room. She was very good at reading rooms. "What do you need from me?" Nathaniel asked. "Access," she said. "To the correspondence records from the last 4 years, all 4 estates that Henderson managed. If Hastings was complicit, if he knew what Henderson was doing, or worse, if he was directing it, the proof will be in the pattern of purchases, the timing, the markup on goods that moved between properties. You want to build a case against Hastings. I want to build the truth," she said. "Whatever that turns out to be. If Hastings is clean, the records will show it. If he's not—" She paused. "Then the county attorney should know, and the court should know, and Harlow County should know that the man sending unsigned letters to intimidate witnesses is himself the witness who should be examined." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. That will make him dangerous, he said. He's already dangerous, she said. He's just dangerous and hidden right now. I prefer dangerous and visible. Another long look. Then, I'll pull the records tonight. What followed was the longest week of Elizabeth's professional life. Every morning she came to the estate before 7. Every evening she left after dark. Nathaniel worked alongside her for the first 3 days, not because he was needed for the accounting, but because he did not leave her alone in a building where someone might argue she had been unsupervised, and also because she suspected he simply did not want to leave. She did not ask him to go. Caleb took to watching the front gate with more attention than his usual duties required. Marcus began making a point of passing through the office every hour with some excuse about refreshments or mail. Nobody said anything about it out loud. But the estate closed around her slightly quietly, the way a hand closes around something it intends to protect. She found the first evidence on the 3rd day. It was not dramatic. It never was with numbers. It was a small discrepancy in a delivery record, a shipment of timber that had been logged as received by the Carter estate, but whose weight and grade matched a delivery that appeared in the Hastings records 2 weeks later as purchased from a different supplier at full price. Someone had bought timber that had already been bought, except the first purchase had been paid for through Henderson's accounts, which meant through Nathaniel's money, and the second purchase had put that same timber into the Hastings supply chain at a profit. She marked it, kept going. By the 5th day, she had 7 instances. By the 7th day, she had 19. It was not a small crime. It was systematic and deliberate, and it had been running for at minimum 2 years. Henderson had been the mechanism, but the pattern pointed clearly toward a directing intelligence, someone who understood the supply chains well enough to move goods between them without triggering notice. Someone with enough standing to make the paperwork look legitimate. Someone like Randolph Hastings. She laid it all out on the desk the evening of the 7th day, and called Nathaniel in from the library where he had been dealing with his own correspondence. He stood at the desk and looked at it. He did not say anything for a long time. "He used my money," he said finally. "Yes. He used Henderson to redirect goods I paid for into his own supply chain and then resold them. That is what the records indicate. For 2 years. At minimum." His jaw worked. She watched it. Watched the controlled fury move through him like a current through water visible in the surface tension, not in the water itself. "I want this in front of Aldridge by Monday," he said. "It'll be ready. Elizabeth." He said her name deliberately. "I need you to understand something." She looked at him. "Whatever happens from here, however this unfolds, I need you to know that I did not bring you into this situation knowing this was waiting. I hired you for legitimate work. He stopped. Started again. "If I had known what Hastings was capable of, I would not have put you in the position of being a target." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know that," she said. "You're certain?" "I read people the same way I read ledgers," she said. "You are not a man who uses people as shields. That's been evident since March." Something in him settled, not entirely, but enough. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the letters. For what he's trying to do to your reputation. You didn't write them." "No, but I'm the reason they exist." She looked at the papers on the desk. The evidence. The truth laid out in ink and figures and dates. "Don't apologize," she said. "Just make sure what I built means something." "It will," he said. "Promise me." He held her gaze. "I promise," he said. "On everything I have." She did not expect what happened Sunday. She had not planned to come to the estate on Sunday. It was the one day she kept for herself for church and accounts, and the quiet that her rented room was not good for much, but was sufficient for. But at 8 in the morning, there was a knock at her door, and when she opened it, Caleb was standing there without his usual apologetic look. He had a different look, a tighter one. "Mr. Carter says, 'Come quick, ma'am,'" he said. She came. Nathaniel was in the study with Aldridge, and a man she didn't recognize younger, with the particular look of someone who delivered unpleasant news for a living. "Miss Whitmore." Nathaniel was standing. He did not sit her down first, which told her it was bad enough that sitting down would feel patronizing. Aldridge received a complaint filed yesterday evening. Against you. She looked at him, then at Aldridge. What kind of complaint? She said. Aldridge's face was carefully neutral, the face of a man who had not yet decided what to do. A formal complaint of professional misconduct, he said. Filed by Randolph Hastings. He alleges that you fabricated portions of the Henderson documentation, that the discrepancies you identified were inserted into the records by you to create a false appearance of fraud for the purpose of deflecting suspicion from your own financial manipulation of the Carter estate accounts. The room was very still. Elizabeth stood in the center of it and let the words land one by one. The way you let rain land, you could not stop it, and there was no use trying. He's claiming she committed the fraud, Nathaniel said, and his voice had dropped to something very quiet. He filed the complaint with the county attorney's office yesterday at closing time, the young man said. That's my name is Garrett Miss Whitmore. I work for Aldridge. That's why I'm here on a Sunday. The timing of the filing was deliberate. It creates a legal complication for the Monday presentation. Because if there's an active complaint against the primary witness, Elizabeth said. The original case pauses pending investigation, Garrett said, which means the September hearing gets pushed, she finished, likely to December, possibly spring. She looked at the floor, thought through it, fast and clean the way she thought through numbers. He's not trying to win, she said. He's trying to create enough delay and noise that the whole thing loses momentum. County attorneys have full dockets. Cases that get complicated tend to get deprioritized. By spring, Henderson may have left the state. Witnesses get harder to reach. Evidence gets disputed and redisputed until the picture blurs. That's correct, Aldridge said. And my reputation. An active misconduct complaint is public record, Garrett said, whether or not it's upheld. She nodded once, slowly. She thought about the $16, the rented room, the families who had trusted her. The year she had spent in Harlow County, building something from nothing with her hands and her mind, and her father's lessons about reading the numbers honestly. She thought about what it meant to have all of that made into a question mark by a man who was afraid of what she had found. She thought about whether she was going to let that happen. She wasn't. I need access to the Hastings estate records, she said. Not just the supply chain documents, his personal accounts, land records, any financial instrument he's filed with the county in the last 4 years. Aldridge looked at her. Those aren't public. They are if a judge signs a writ of examination in connection with an existing fraud investigation, she said, which the Henderson case already is. The complaint Hastings filed doesn't pause the original investigation. It can only pause my testimony. But the investigation itself is still active, which means Aldridge can request examination of any financial records connected to the parties under review. Silence. Garrett turned to Aldridge. Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. She's right, he said. I know I'm right, she said. Can you get the writ? Not on a Sunday. Monday morning. Aldridge looked at Garrett. First thing, Garrett said. Then I need the records by Tuesday, Elizabeth said. And I need a space to work that isn't this estate, because anything I produce here will be challenged on the grounds of conflict of interest. You can use the magistrate's office, Aldridge said. Good. She looked at Nathaniel. He had not spoken for several minutes. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. I need the 19 instances I documented this week formally logged before Monday. Can Marcus prepare the notarized copies? Tonight, Nathaniel said. I'll have him start now. And I need... She stopped. The weight of it was there suddenly. Not the strategy, not the legal architecture. Those were clear, and she could build them with her eyes closed. The weight was the other thing. The thing she was not saying out loud, which was, I came here 11 months ago to find a man, his wife, and now I am standing in his study on a Sunday morning, defending myself against a criminal complaint because I found something true, and every single person in this room is here because they chose to be. And that is, she stopped. Are you all right? Nathaniel asked. She looked at him. He had left Aldridge and Garrett and crossed the room, and he was standing close enough that she could have said something quietly that the other men would not hear. I'm fine, she said. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes. No, she said honestly. I'm not entirely all right, but I will be. He held her gaze. Then he turned back to the room. Garrett, tell Aldridge what else he needs to prepare. I need 5 minutes. Garrett and Aldridge moved toward the window, having the particular discretion of men who understood when a room needed to get smaller. Nathaniel looked at her. Say it, he said quietly. Say what? Whatever you're not saying. She looked at him. This man who had pushed 18 marriage proposals back across a desk because none of them were the right conversation. This man who had spent his own money correcting a grain overcharge she'd mentioned in passing. This man who had contacted a buyer in Richmond before telling his trading partner that money was not an argument he was willing to hear. I'm afraid, she said, very quietly. Not of him. Not of the complaint. I can answer the complaint, the records will answer it without my help. I'm afraid of... She stopped. I'm afraid of what it means that I'm not leaving. He looked at her. You could leave, he said. I wouldn't stop you. I know. But you're not going to. She looked at the documents on the desk, the truth she had built in 19 instances over 7 days. The thing that mattered regardless of who it cost. No, she said. I'm not going to. Something in his face changed. Something opened that had been held carefully closed. He did not reach for her, did not close the space between them in any way that the two men at the window could see. But his voice when he spoke was lower and warmer than she had ever heard it. All right, he said. Then we do this together. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the room and said, Aldridge, what do we need first? And the work began. By Sunday evening, Marcus had produced 12 notarized copies of the 19 instances. Aldridge had drafted the writ request. Garrett had identified the county judge most likely to sign it without delay, and had sent a writer ahead to prepare for an early Monday appointment. Elizabeth rode home at 9 that night. The Virginia summer was beginning to release its grip. Finally, the heat going thin and dry at the edges, the nights cooling by a few degrees. She could feel it in the air as she rode the seasons starting to turn the way seasons did without asking anyone's permission. She got back to her room, lit the lamp, and opened her account ledger. She didn't look at her own accounts. She looked at the blank page at the back, the one she kept for notes. She wrote the 19 instances from memory, all of them in order with dates and amounts because she needed to know they were somewhere safe that wasn't the estate. She wrote until midnight. Then she closed the book, put it under the floorboard beneath her bed where she kept her most important documents, and blew out the lamp. She lay in the dark and thought about what Nathaniel had said. We do this together. She had spent 3 years in Harlow County doing things alone. She had built her practice alone. She had fought for her reputation alone. She had managed her fear alone, and her victories alone, and the particular loneliness of being a capable woman in a world that found capability in women slightly inconvenient. She had managed that alone too. The idea of not doing it alone was so unfamiliar that she couldn't decide if it was a comfort or a terror. She decided in the dark that it was both, and that both was probably honest, and that honest was the only thing she had ever known how to be. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow the writ would be signed. The records would be examined. The truth would be built again carefully, the way she built everything number by number, fact by fact, until the picture was so clear that no amount of fear or money or influence could blur it. And Randolph Hastings, who had looked at a minister's daughter with no money and no family, and decided she could be removed with an unsigned letter, was about to find out exactly what he had miscalculated. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The writ was signed at 7:45 Monday morning. Elizabeth knew because Garrett sent Caleb with a note before she had finished her coffee, and she was at the magistrate's office by 8, with her account ledger under her arm, and the look on her face that Nathaniel had once described privately as the one she wore when she had already won and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Aldridge met her at the door. "Judge Carver signed it," he said. "We have access to Hastings's county-filed financial records going back 5 years. Land instruments, supply contracts, tax assessments, anything recorded with the county clerk." "Good," she said. "Where do we start? I have a clerk pulling the files now." "I need them by noon." Aldridge looked at her. "Miss Whitmore, this is a significant volume of records." "I know what volume of records looks like," she said. "I need them by noon." He got them to her by 11:30. She worked through lunch. She worked through the afternoon. Garrett brought her water at 2 and coffee at 4, and she drank both without looking up from the documents. By the time the light changed and the magistrate's office emptied of its regular business, she had built the outline of something that was not just evidence of Henderson's fraud. It was evidence of a conspiracy. Henderson had not been stealing from the 4 estates independently. He had been stealing from 3 of them to benefit one. The goods that had disappeared from the Carter accounts, from the Whitfield accounts, from the Alderton properties, they had been systematically redirected. Not sold. Redirected. Into Randolph Hastings's supply chain, where they appeared as purchased goods at fair market value, and the difference between what Hastings had paid, which was nothing, and what he had logged as purchased, which was full price, had been pocketed quietly over 26 months. It was elegant in the way that evil things sometimes were when a clever man built them. It was patient. It was designed to survive a casual audit. It had not survived Elizabeth Whitmore. She set her pen down at 6 in the evening, looked at the 12 pages she had written, and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing completed correctly. Then she picked the pen back up and wrote a cover letter to the county attorney. She did not use language like alleged or appears to indicate. She used language like demonstrates and establishes, and the preponderance of documentary evidence confirms. She had spent enough time reading legal correspondence to know the difference between the language of suggestion and the language of fact, and what she had built was fact. She signed it, dated it, gave it to Garrett to deliver first thing Tuesday. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was at the estate in the library, and he looked up the moment she came through the door with the particular alertness of a man who had been waiting for hours and was not going to admit it. "Well?" he said. She sat down across from him. She was tired in a way that went past her body, the kind of tired that came from holding a very high level of concentration for a very long time without allowing it to slip. She had been doing that since Sunday morning. "It's worse than we thought," she said. Hastings wasn't just benefiting from Henderson's theft. He was directing it. The records show a pattern of purchases that only makes sense if someone with knowledge of all 4 supply chains was coordinating which goods moved where. Henderson didn't have that knowledge. His role was too narrow, but Hastings sat on the County Supply Commission for 3 years. He had access to all 4 estates' procurement records as part of county price regulation. Nathaniel went very still. He used his commission seat, he said, to identify what each estate was purchasing and at what price, and then to instruct Henderson to redirect those same goods before they arrived, so he could log them as his own separate purchases. She paused. The County Supply Commission is supposed to prevent price gouging. He used it to run the most efficient theft operation in the county. Nathaniel stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a moment, and she watched his shoulders and understood he was doing what he always did with anger, taking it apart carefully before he turned back around. "How much?" he said, still facing the window. "Across all 4 estates over 26 months, my best estimate is between $4,000 and $6,000. He turned. She held his gaze. "That's—" He stopped. "A significant sum," she said. "Yes." "Split how?" "Impossible to know exactly without Hastings's personal accounts, which the writ doesn't cover. But based on what moved through the Carter estate alone—" She looked at her notes. At minimum $1,200 of what you paid for goods over 2 years did not purchase the goods you received. The goods were delivered to Hastings and replaced with cheaper substitutes or not replaced at all. Nathaniel sat back down. He put both hands flat on the desk. He filed a complaint against you, he said, claiming you fabricated this. Yes. Because he knew what the real investigation would find. He knew that if I kept working, I would find exactly what I found, and he calculated that an active misconduct complaint against the primary analyst would be enough to pause everything long enough for the trail to go cold. He underestimated you. Most people do, she said. It's useful. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in it she was getting better at reading a layered thing, part admiration and part something more personal, and part a kind of anger that was not directed at her, but was somehow about her, about what she had been put through, about the letters and the threat, and a man deciding she was small enough to be moved. What happens now? He said. The county attorney receives my analysis tomorrow morning. The misconduct complaint Hastings filed will be reviewed alongside the fraud evidence. Given that the complaint appears to have been filed specifically to obstruct an active fraud investigation, it may itself constitute an obstruction charge. She paused. Garrett thinks Aldridge will move to have the complaint dismissed by Thursday. And the September hearing. Still possible if the county attorney moves quickly. She hesitated. There's one complication. He waited. Hastings has friends on the county commission, she said. Not the supply commission, he'll be removed from that immediately, but the general commission. Men who have worked alongside him for years, who owe him favors, who will not want the full picture of his activities made public because some of them may have benefited in smaller ways they'd rather not examine. Political pressure, he said. Yes, the county attorney will feel it. Aldridge will feel it. The question is whether what I built is strong enough to move forward despite that pressure. He looked at her steadily. Is it? He said. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. It is. The county attorney's name was Prescott, and he received Elizabeth's analysis at 8 Tuesday morning and sent a request for her to appear at his office at 2 in the afternoon. She appeared at 1:55. Prescott was a lean man in his 50s with the carefully maintained neutrality of someone who had survived several administrations of county politics by never visibly taking a side before he was certain which side would win. He had her analysis on his desk, and he had been reading it because the pages were marked and there was a second cup of coffee going cold near his elbow. He looked at her when she sat down. This is thorough, he said. Thank you. The supply commission angle is... He stopped, chose his next words carefully. Significant. Yes. You understand that pursuing this fully will implicate several parties beyond Henderson and Hastings. I understand that the evidence points where it points, she said. What you do with it is your decision. What I've produced is an honest accounting of what the records show. He looked at her for a long moment. The misconduct complaint Hastings filed against you, he said. Fabricated, she said. The records I analyzed are the same records available to any reviewer. I've documented every source. Any other analyst can replicate my findings from the original documents. He'll argue you had access to those documents through your position at the Carter estate. That Carter allowed you access specifically to build a case that benefited him. The original investigation predates any question of my personal relationship with Mr. Carter, she said. I was engaged as a professional to review accounts. I found evidence of fraud. I reported it. The timeline is documented. Your personal relationship with Carter is known to the county, Prescott said. Carefully, not unkindly. My professional relationship with Mr. Carter is documented, she said. Anything beyond that is social speculation, and social speculation is not admissible. He almost smiled. No, he said. It isn't. He closed the folder. I'll review this fully by Thursday. The misconduct complaint will be addressed separately. I have grounds to dismiss it as retaliatory given the timing, and I intend to do so." She nodded. "Miss Whitmore." He paused. "The work you've done here is exceptional. I've had professional analysts in this office for 20 years, and I would put this against any of them." Another pause. "I say that because I want you to understand that when this is over, and it will be over one way or another, the door of this office is open to you if you want legitimate work." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "I'll keep that in mind." She stood, shook his hand, and left. In the hallway out of sight of his office, she stopped. She put her hand against the wall. She breathed, not because she was afraid, because sometimes when things happened that were the opposite of what you had braced for, the body needed a moment to recalibrate. She had walked into that office prepared to defend herself against a skeptic and walked out with something that felt cautiously and without certainty like an ally. She straightened, picked up her bag, walked out into the August heat. Caroline Hastings came to find her Wednesday morning, not to the estate, to her room above the printer's shop, which meant she had asked someone for the address, which meant this was not impulsive. Elizabeth heard the knock and opened the door and felt the surprise of it, not the worst surprise she'd had this week, but notable. Caroline looked different, not the green silk this time, a plain gray dress, her hair simply done. The careful construction of her usual presentation stripped back to something that looked unexpectedly like a real person. "May I come in?" Caroline said. Elizabeth stepped back. Caroline came in and looked at the small room, the desk, the ledgers, the floorboards. Elizabeth had been careful not to look at, since hiding the backup documents beneath them, and her expression was not contemptuous. It was something more complicated. She sat in the only chair that wasn't covered in paperwork. Elizabeth leaned against the desk and waited. "My father is going to be arrested," Caroline said. It wasn't a question. "That's the county attorney's decision," Elizabeth said. "But you built the case. I documented what the record showed." Caroline looked at her hands. She was wearing gloves, old habit, probably social armor, and she pulled them off and held them and did not look up for a moment. "Did you know," she said, "when you started, that it would lead here?" "I knew someone was trying to stop me from finding something," Elizabeth said. "I didn't know what the something was until I found it." "If you had known—" Caroline stopped. "I would have looked harder," Elizabeth said. Caroline looked up. "He's my father," she said. "I know that. He did this—" She stopped again, started again. "He told me he said it was just the way business worked, that everyone used their position to secure advantages, that it wasn't theft, it was—" She shook her head. "He used words that made it sound like common practice." "It's not common practice," Elizabeth said. "It's theft. The words men use to describe it don't change what it is." Silence. "I didn't know," Caroline said. "I want you to know that. I didn't know the extent of it." Elizabeth looked at her. She looked for the performance, the angle, the calculation, the social strategy. She had been looking for those things in Caroline Hastings for months. She didn't find them. Not this morning. What she found was a woman who had spent her life believing her family's standing was the result of competence and position, and was sitting in a small rented room above a printer's shop, learning that it was the result of theft from her neighbors. "I believe you," Elizabeth said. Caroline looked at her. "You do?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because what you're feeling right now is real," Elizabeth said. "You can't perform that." Caroline looked at her hands again. "I came to say—" She stopped, took a breath. "I came to say that the things I said about you, the rumors I spread, She stopped again. "I was wrong. I was protecting something that didn't deserve protecting, and I used you as the thing to push against because because I was convenient," Elizabeth said. "Because you were everything I told myself I wasn't afraid of," Caroline said. "And I was." The room was quiet. Elizabeth thought about the letters, the unsigned ones. She thought about the pause at the dry goods counter, The Whitfield dinner. The comments about a woman knowing her place. She thought about what it cost a woman to walk into someone's rented room and say I was wrong. "All right," Elizabeth said. "All right. You came here. You said it. That matters." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't cause damage. It did. My reputation spent 3 months in question because of what you put into circulation. That cost me business. It cost me sleep." She held Carolyn's gaze. "But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what it takes to sit in that chair and say what you just said." Caroline was quiet for a moment. "What happens to him?" she asked. "My father." "I don't know exactly," Elizabeth said honestly. "That depends on what Prescott decides to pursue and how the county commission responds to the pressure his allies will apply. The evidence is clear. What the system does with clear evidence—" She paused. "That's never entirely predictable. Will you testify against him?" If asked, yes. Caroline nodded, slowly, like she had expected that and needed to hear it confirmed. She stood, pulled her gloves back on, the armor going back up but differently, not as a weapon this time. More like habit. More like a woman who didn't yet know who she was without it, but was beginning to think about the question. "Miss Whitmore," she said at the door, "for what it's worth, I think you're going to be good for him, for Nathaniel." Elizabeth looked at her. "He's been alone a long time," Caroline said, "and not because he wanted to be." She left. Elizabeth stood in the middle of her small room for a full minute after the door closed. Then she sat down at her desk. Then she put her face in her hands, not from sadness, not from fear, but from the sheer accumulated weight of a week in which almost everything had been harder and stranger and more human than she had been prepared for. After a moment, she picked up her pen. She had work to do. Thursday came fast and hard. Aldridge dismissed the misconduct complaint at 10 in the morning. By noon, the dismissal had been formally recorded. By 2, Prescott had sent notification to Hastings's attorney that the county attorney's office was opening a formal investigation into the Supply Commission records. Elizabeth heard all of this from Garrett, who appeared at the magistrate's office door with the particular energy of a young man delivering news he found genuinely satisfying. "It's moving," he said. "Faster than I expected." "Good," she said. "Hastings' attorney requested an emergency meeting with Prescott this morning. Prescott declined." "Also good. There are 3 county commissioners who've sent notes to Prescott's office suggesting the matter should be reviewed at the commission level before proceeding criminally." Garrett paused. Prescott sent back a very polite letter explaining that criminal investigation is not within the commission's purview. Elizabeth felt something in her chest ease slightly. "How's Aldridge?" she said. "Steady. He's been on the county commission himself for 12 years. He knows where the pressure's coming from, and he's not moving." She nodded, looked at her papers. "What's the timeline for the September hearing now?" "Still possible," Garrett said. "Prescott thinks if he moves on the formal investigation this week, the Henderson case can proceed as originally scheduled. Your analysis of the Hastings connection would be presented as supplementary evidence. It expands the scope, but doesn't delay the core case." "All right." She paused. "And Hastings himself. His attorney is advised that voluntary cooperation with the investigation would be viewed favorably." Garrett's expression was carefully neutral. "I don't expect voluntary cooperation." "Neither do I," she said. She gathered her papers, set them in order, thought through the sequence of what came next. Testimony documentation, the careful architecture of truth made public. "Garrett," she said. "Ma'am, thank you, for Monday morning, for moving fast." He looked slightly surprised, like he wasn't used to being thanked. "You did the work," he said. "I just carried the documents." "Carrying documents matters," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He almost smiled. He was probably 23. He reminded her just slightly of herself 10 years ago, trying to be useful in a system that had not yet decided what to do with her. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She rode to the estate that evening. She hadn't planned it. She had planned to go back to her room, review her testimony outline, get a full night's sleep before the week's final push. But somehow she found herself on the road to Carter Estate at 6 in the evening, with the first hint of cooler air coming through the trees, and she did not turn around. Nathaniel was in the yard when she arrived. He had been working. His coat was off, his sleeves rolled, and he had the look of a man who used physical labor the way she used numbers as a way to keep the mind's anxiety from eating itself. He saw her coming up the road and stopped what he was doing. She dismounted. They stood in the yard and looked at each other. "Complaint dismissed," she said. "I heard." "Prescott's moving on the formal investigation." "I heard that too." He paused. "Aldridge sent word." She nodded. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The summer evening settled around them. The mockingbird was quiet for once. The heat had gone thin the way it had been going thin all week, the season pulling back by degrees. "It's almost over," she said. "The case?" he said. "Yes." "But not—" He stopped. She looked at him. "Not other things," he said. She looked at her horse, at the gate, at the oak trees that lined the road, at every place that was not his face while she sorted through what was happening in her chest, the particular internal landscape of a woman who had spent 11 months being professional and 8 weeks being something she didn't have a word for yet. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes. I'm not leaving Harlow County." A pause. "I know. I'm not leaving because of the case," she said. "The case is almost settled. I could leave after September and no one could say I'd abandoned anything. I know that. I'm not leaving," she said, "because I don't want to." The evening held very still. He looked at her with the expression that was not the almost smile, and not the cataloging look, and not the controlled anger look. The one she had seen only twice before, once at the Whitfield house, and once on Sunday morning, when she'd told him she was staying. The one that looked like a man who had stopped waiting. "Elizabeth," he said. "Don't say anything yet," she said. "Let me finish." He waited. "I have spent my entire adult life being careful," she said. "Careful with my reputation, careful with my money, careful with my time and my words and my feelings, because I couldn't afford to be careless with any of them. When you don't have a cushion, every mistake costs more. Every misplaced trust costs more. I have been careful because I had to be." She stopped, looked at him, looked. "I am still going to be careful," she said. "That's not something that turns off. But I have been watching you for 8 months. I watched you take the grain correction seriously without being told twice. I watched you contact buyers in Richmond before you told Hastings no. I watched you sit beside me at a desk instead of across from me. I watched you ask Marcus to clear your afternoon 23 times. She paused. "I have been reading you the way I read ledgers. And the ledger says you are exactly who you appear to be." He did not move. "That's rare," she said. "I don't take it lightly." "I know you don't," he said. "I'm not saying yes," she said. "I'm saying I'm no longer saying I don't know." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She looked at him. "You're very patient," she said, "for a man who gets what he wants." "I told you," he said. "I'm learning to work harder for things worth having." She looked away, looked back. "Ask me again," she said. "At the end of September, when the hearing is done and the case is settled and I'm not standing in your yard covered in someone else's legal crisis." She paused. "Ask me when it's just a question and not a strategy." "All right," he said, "and I'll answer honestly." "You always do," he said. She picked up her reins. He stepped forward and held her horse while she mounted the way he had started doing weeks ago without comment, and she had let him without comment, and neither of them had said anything about it, because some things didn't need to be said to be understood. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. "Good night, Elizabeth," he said. She rode back down the oak-lined road. She did not look back, but she was smiling before she reached the gate, and she let herself have that. She had earned harder things this week than a smile. The days between then and the September hearing moved differently than the summer had. The frantic pace of the fraud investigation settled into the steadier work of preparation, organizing testimony, reviewing the final documentation with Garrett, meeting twice more with Prescott to ensure the scope of what would be presented was clear and complete. Nathaniel prepared separately. He had his own attorney now, a man from Richmond, who had read Elizabeth's analysis and declared it the most organized fraud documentation he had reviewed in 15 years of practice, which Nathaniel passed along to Elizabeth, with a brevity that barely concealed his satisfaction. The Henderson hearing was set for the 14th of September. Hastings' attorney made 3 attempts to delay it. All 3 were denied. The county commission held one meeting at which 3 members made arguments for proceeding carefully and not disrupting business relationships in the county. Aldridge responded to each argument point by point. The meeting ended with the commission voting not to interfere with the county attorney's process, 5-3. 2 days before the hearing, Randolph Hastings made a different kind of move. He sent his attorney to Elizabeth directly. She was at the magistrate's office when the attorney, a soft man named Cowell, who perspired in September heat, arrived with a sealed envelope and the expression of someone who had been assigned a task he found distasteful. "From my client," he said, "a private settlement offer." She looked at the envelope. She did not open it. "Tell your client," she said, "that I am a professional analyst engaged by the county attorney's office to provide testimony in an active legal proceeding. I am not a party to the case, and I am not in a position to receive settlement offers. If your client wishes to make arrangements, he should direct them to the county attorney." Cowell looked at her. "Miss Whitmore." "Good day, Mr. Cowell," she said. He left. She sat for a moment looking at the sealed envelope he had left on the desk. Then she picked it up and carried it directly to Prescott's office and placed it on his desk and said, "Hastings' attorney just attempted to deliver this to me privately." Prescott looked at it. Then he looked at her. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore," he said. Not because she needed to sit down, because what she had just done had changed the complexion of the case in one clean motion, and he needed a moment to arrange what came next. She sat. "He's desperate," Prescott said. "Yes. Approaching a witness with a settlement offer 2 days before a hearing is inadvisable," she said, "at minimum." "It may constitute witness tampering," Prescott said. She said nothing. That was not her call. Prescott opened the envelope carefully, read it. His expression moved through several stages and settled on something that looked underneath the professional neutral like mild fury. "He offered you $300, he said. "To do what?" she said. "The letter isn't specific. It references—" He stopped, read again. "It references your desire for financial stability and offers a private arrangement to secure your future should you find your circumstances changed by the current proceedings." Elizabeth looked at him. "He's offering to pay me to change my testimony," she said. "That is what this appears to be," Prescott said. "I'd like that noted formally," she said, "with the date and time of delivery and the fact that I brought it directly here." "It's already being noted," Prescott said. He put the letter in his file. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'll see you Friday morning." "Yes, sir," she said. "You will." She walked out, down the hall, out the front door, into the September air, which was cooler now. Genuinely cooler, the summer finally giving way. The way it always did, not all at once, but degree by degree. Until one day, you looked up, and the world had changed while you were paying attention to something else. She thought about $300. $300 was almost a year's income for her. She thought about the $16 in her account, and the rented room, and the floorboard, under which her backup documents were still sitting, just in case. She thought about Randolph Hastings, who had looked at those numbers and decided they added up to a woman who could be bought. She walked to where her horse was tied and stood for a moment with her hand on the horse's neck, and she thought about her father. About a minister from Piedmont County who had taught her to read ledgers and to tell the truth about what they said, and to understand that the truth did not change its shape based on how much someone was willing to pay to make it look different. The numbers say what the numbers say. He had told her once when she was 12 and had found a discrepancy in a church account that implicated a man everyone liked. You write them down honest, that's all you're responsible for. What people do with the honest numbers that's on them. She had written them down honest, all of them. For 11 months, and through every threat and letter and settlement offer and rumor and whispered pause at the dry goods counter. She had written them down honest. Friday morning she was going to say them out loud. And Randolph Hastings was going to learn what it cost to decide that a minister's daughter with $16 and a rented room was not worth taking seriously. She mounted her horse and turned toward the road. The September sky was clear and wide and already turning the first faint colors of a season that was finally coming. She rode toward it. The 14th of September arrived the way significant days always did, without fanfare, without warning. Weather without any sign from the ordinary world that something was about to be decided that could not be undecided. Elizabeth was awake before 5. She did not pace. She did not rehearse her testimony out loud. She had learned long ago that the work done in preparation was either sufficient or it wasn't. And repeating it at 5 in the morning in a rented room above a printer's shop was not going to change which one it was. She dressed carefully. Not the blue dress that was for social occasions, and this was not a social occasion. She wore her gray wool, which was professional and clean and did not announce itself. She pulled her hair back with the same precision she brought to columns of numbers. She checked her document folder 3 times. She was at the county courthouse by 7:30. Garrett was already there standing outside with 2 cups of coffee and the look of a young man who had not slept well. "How are you?" he said. "Ready," she said. He handed her the coffee. "Prescott arrived at 7, he said. "Hastings and his attorney are inside. Henderson arrived last night from Richmond. The sheriff's office escorted him." "And Henderson's testimony. He's cooperating," Garrett said. "Fully. His attorney negotiated reduced charges in exchange for complete disclosure." He paused. "He named Hastings directly, 3 weeks ago in his deposition. I didn't tell you because Prescott wanted it sealed until today." Elizabeth looked at him. "Henderson named him directly," she said. "Named him dated the conversations, described the system. He kept records of his own private ones, separate from the estate accounts. He was protecting himself in case Hastings ever decided to make him the only responsible party." Garrett paused. "Which, as it turns out, was exactly what Hastings planned." Elizabeth absorbed that. Henderson had been stealing, yes. Henderson had been the mechanism of the fraud. But he had also been watching his back the whole time, quietly building his own insurance. And that insurance was now sitting in the county attorney's files alongside 12 pages of Elizabeth's analysis and 19 documented instances and a sealed letter from Randolph Hastings offering a witness $300 to look the other way. "He's finished," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Garrett said. "He is." She drank her coffee. "Garrett," she said, "when this is over, whatever Prescott offers you next, take it. You're good at this." He looked surprised, then pleased, then quickly professional again. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Thank you." The hearing room held 40 people. It held 53 by the time proceedings began at 9 o'clock, because Harlow County had been watching this build for 2 months, and the people of Harlow County were not going to miss the morning it came apart. Elizabeth sat at the front table with Prescott and Garrett. She did not look around the room for familiar faces. She looked at the documents in front of her and kept her breathing even and her hands still. She heard Nathaniel come in. She did not see him, but she heard the particular shift in the room's attention that happened when he entered spaces, the subtle reorientation of people toward something with weight. He sat somewhere behind her. She kept her eyes forward. Judge Harmon opened the proceedings at 9 sharp. He was a compact man in his 60s, with a reputation for brevity and intolerance of theater, which Elizabeth found reassuring. Henderson testified first. He was thinner than she had expected. She had never met him, only traced his movements through numbers, and he had the look of a man who had spent weeks practicing how to be honest after years of practicing something else. He spoke clearly. He confirmed the dates. He confirmed the mechanism. He confirmed that Randolph Hastings had approached him in the spring of 1815 with a proposal for what Hastings had called a more efficient distribution of county resources. Those were his words, Prescott said. Yes, sir, Henderson said. He said we'd be helping the county work better, that the goods would still get used, just routed more sensibly. And you understood that to mean the goods would be redirected to his estate. Yes, sir, that was clear enough. And you agreed. I did. Henderson's voice dropped slightly. I'm not proud of it. Were you compensated by Mr. Hastings for this arrangement? Quarterly, cash payments. He called them consulting fees. Prescott let that sit for a moment. The room was silent enough that Elizabeth could hear someone 3 rows back breathing. No further questions, Prescott said. Hastings' attorney Cowell stood for cross-examination. He spent 20 minutes trying to establish that Henderson was an unreliable witness with personal grievances, that his private records were self-serving, that his cooperation with the county attorney made his testimony suspect. Henderson answered each question steadily. The private records were dated and consistent. The consulting fees appeared in his personal accounts as received. The dates matched the redirected deliveries. A man building a false story to protect himself builds it after the fact, and the dates said these records were contemporaneous. Cowell sat down. Elizabeth's name was called at 10:15. She stood, walked to the front, sat in the witness chair with the same straight-backed composure she had maintained in Nathaniel Carter's study for 11 months, and she looked at Judge Harmon and waited. Prescott was thorough and methodical. He walked her through each of the 19 instances. He asked her to explain her methodology, her sources, the cross-referencing she had applied to connect the Carter estate records to the Hastings supply chain. He asked her to explain what made the pattern distinctive, what separated intentional redirection from simple accounting error. She explained it. She used plain language, not because she thought the room was unsophisticated, but because the truth told plainly was stronger than the truth dressed up. She had learned that from her father, and confirmed it every time she had watched a complicated explanation confuse a clear fact. When she finished the 19th instance, the room was very quiet. Miss Whitmore, Prescott said, in your professional assessment, having reviewed the original estate accounts, the county filed records, and the supply commission documentation, is there any interpretation of these figures that does not indicate deliberate coordinated fraud? She looked at him. No, she said. There is not. Cowell's cross-examination was not gentle. He questioned her access to the records. He questioned her methodology. He questioned whether a woman without formal legal or accounting credentials was qualified to make the assessments she had made. She answered each question the way she answered all hard questions directly and without apology. My qualifications, she said, are 14 years of professional practice reviewing financial records for estates, families, and commercial arrangements across 4 Virginia counties. I have identified fraud in 3 prior cases, all of which were subsequently confirmed by county review. My methods in this case are documented in full and available for any qualified reviewer to replicate. If there is an error in my analysis, I welcome its identification. Cowell looked at her. You have a personal relationship with Mr. Carter, he said, the primary complainant in this case. I have a professional engagement with Mr. Carter's estate, she said. My analysis was conducted under the auspices of the county attorney's office and has been reviewed and accepted by that office. But you are... Cowell paused, choosing the word carefully, personally involved with him. The room shifted slightly, the particular charged quality of a room waiting for something. Mr. Cowell, Judge Harmon said, is there a question whether Miss Whitmore's personal attachment to Mr. Carter creates a bias that renders her testimony unreliable? Cowell said. Is that a question? Harmon said. Yes, Your Honor. Harmon looked at Elizabeth. She looked at Cowell. My analysis was built from documents that exist independently of me, she said. I did not create the Supply Commission records. I did not create the Carter estate accounts, or the Hastings land instruments, or the delivery logs. Those documents existed before I reviewed them, and they exist now without my interpretation. Any qualified person reviewing them would find the same pattern. My personal circumstances do not alter what the numbers say." She paused. "The numbers say what the numbers say," she said. "That is all I've done here, read them honestly." Cowell had nothing for a moment. Then, nothing further. She walked back to her seat. She sat down. Prescott put a hand on the table, not on her hand, just near it, the quiet acknowledgement of a man who had just watched something done well. She looked at her documents. Her hands were perfectly steady. Randolph Hastings took the stand at 11:30. He was a large man who had spent his life taking up space confidently, and he walked to the witness chair with the deliberate pace of someone trying to control a room with their body. He sat down. He adjusted his coat. He looked at the judge with the expression of a man who had sat across from important people his whole life and found them manageable. He began by denying everything. He did it smoothly. He had clearly prepared with Cowell at length. He characterized Henderson's testimony as the self-interested fabrication of a man trying to reduce his own culpability. He characterized Elizabeth's analysis as the work of a woman motivated by personal loyalty to Nathaniel Carter. He characterized the entire proceeding as a politically motivated attack on his county commission seat. He was good at it. Elizabeth watched him and thought, this is what confidence built on wrong foundations looks like, solid on the surface, hollow underneath. Prescott waited. He let Hastings speak. Let him build the version of the story. Let him fill the room with it. Then Prescott stood up. "Mr. Hastings," he said, "you've testified that you had no knowledge of Henderson's activities and no financial relationship with him beyond standard business dealings. Is that correct?" "That's correct. You received no cash payments from Henderson at any point during his tenure as supply manager for the 4 estates?" "None." "You made no arrangement with Henderson to redirect goods purchased by neighboring estates into your own supply chain?" "No such arrangement existed." Prescott picked up a document. "This is a record from Harlow County First Bank," he said. "Specifically the account ledger for a private account held under the name R.H. Trading registered to Randolph Hastings in March of 1815. Can you identify this document?" A pause. The first pause. "I have various business accounts," Hastings said. "This specific account," Prescott said. "R.H. Trading. Can you identify it?" Another pause. Longer. "I may have, yes, a trading account for various commercial purposes. This account received quarterly deposits beginning in June of 1815 and continuing through March of this year. The deposits are consistent in amount and timing with the consulting fees described in Henderson's testimony." Prescott set the document down and picked up another. "This is the account ledger for Henderson's personal savings account subpoenaed as part of the formal investigation. The withdrawals from Henderson's account match within 3 days each quarter the deposits into your R.H. Trading account." The room had gone absolutely still. "Mr. Hastings," Prescott said, "you testified under oath that you received no cash payments from Henderson." Hastings looked at Cowell. Cowell's face had the expression of a man watching something he had hoped wouldn't happen happening anyway. There may have been some consulting arrangements." Hastings stopped. "Consulting arrangements," Prescott repeated. "Business is complex. Mr. Hastings?" Prescott's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You have testified under oath in direct contradiction of documentary evidence currently before this court. I would strongly suggest that before you continue, you consult with your attorney." Harmon looked at Cowell. "Mr. Cowell, does your client require a recess?" Cowell stood. His face had gone the particular gray of a man who had just understood the full scope of the situation he was in. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "We request a brief recess." The recess lasted 35 minutes. Elizabeth sat in the hallway with Garrett and Prescott and drank water and did not say very much because there was not very much to say. The shape of what was happening was clear. When they went back in, Cowell stood before the judge and stated that his client wished to revise certain elements of his prior testimony. The revision took 40 minutes. By the end of it, Randolph Hastings had admitted to the consulting arrangement with Henderson, had admitted to the quarterly payments, had admitted to having knowledge that goods were being redirected through Henderson's management, and had disputed only the extent of his directing role versus his passive benefit. It was not an admission of everything, but it was enough. Harmon recessed the hearing until the following Monday, at which point formal findings would be entered. He recommended strongly that Hastings's attorney use the weekend constructively. The room began to empty. Elizabeth gathered her documents and stood and turned toward the door, and she found herself face to face with Nathaniel, who had been sitting 3 rows back and had made his way forward with the particular quiet efficiency of a man who had decided where he was going. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You were right," he said. "About which part?" "All of it," he said. "But specifically, I heard what you said to Cowell, about the numbers saying what the numbers say." He paused. "Your father." "Yes," she said. "He taught you well." "He taught me honestly," she said. "That's the same thing." They walked out of the courthouse together into the September air, which was clean and cool and smelled like the first real breath of autumn. The crowd that had filled the hearing room was dispersing around them. Neighbors, commission members, curious observers, people who had known Randolph Hastings for years and were now rearranging what they knew about him. Elizabeth watched them go and felt something in her chest settle slowly like sediment after water goes still. "It's not over," she said. "Monday, the formal findings. Whatever Hastings' attorney negotiates over the weekend." "I know," Nathaniel said. "But today is over." She looked at him. "Today is over," she said. "And I told you I'd ask again at the end of September," he said. She breathed out slowly. "You told me to ask at the end of September," he said, "when the hearing was done, when it was just a question." "It's not the end of September," she said. "No," he said. "But the hearing is done, and it is just a question." She looked at the courthouse behind them, at the documents under her arm, at the county road that led back to her rented room and the floorboard, and the $16 that had become something more by now, not enough, not nearly enough, but more than it had been when she arrived in Harlow County 3 years ago. She thought about careful. She had been careful her whole life. She would keep being careful. That was not something that turned off just because a man had honest eyes and used her first name like it mattered. But careful and closed were not the same thing. She had learned that this summer. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "Elizabeth," he said, "will you marry me?" He did not dress it up. No theatrical gesture, no speech, just her name and the question and the particular quality of his stillness. The stillness of a man who had decided and was patient and had been patient for a very long time. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about every ledger she had built in 14 years, every figure she had traced, every truth she had pulled out of numbers that were trying to hide it. She had always been looking for the same thing, the account that balanced. The books that told an honest story without gaps or invention or convenient omissions. She had found it. Unexpectedly, inconveniently, in the middle of a fraud case, in the summer heat, in a study with 2 chairs pushed together over records that needed reading. "Yes," she said. Just that. One word. The clearest figure on the page. She came back to the estate on a Sunday, not for accounts, not for documentation, not for any professional reason at all, which was something she had still not entirely learned to do, arrive somewhere without a purpose she could name to someone who asked. Marcus opened the door and smiled the real smile, not the almost smile he reserved for situations that required discretion. "He's in the library," Marcus said. "I know where he is," she said. She found Nathaniel at the library table with correspondence spread in front of him, and he looked up when she came in, and something in his face simply opened. The way a window opens when someone lifts the latch. Not dramatically, not with proclamation, just the release of something that had been held a long time. "Sit down," he said. You always say that. You always argue. I'm not arguing today, she said. She sat. He set down his pen. I want to talk about the estate accounts, she said. He looked at her. Not now. Yes, now, she said. Because this is the part people don't say out loud when they agree to marry, and I need to say it. She put her document folder on the table. If I am to be part of this estate, genuinely part of it, not an ornament, and not a dependency, then I need to know everything. The full picture. What the estate owns, what it owes, where the weak seams are. Not because I don't trust your management, because I will not live in a house whose foundations I haven't examined. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the desk drawer. He pulled out a leather folder she had never seen thicker than anything he had shown her before and set it on the table between them. I had this prepared, he said, 3 weeks ago. She looked at it. You were certain I'd say yes, she said. I was certain you'd ask this question, he said, and I wanted to be ready with an honest answer. She opened the folder. She read. He waited. She read for an hour. She asked questions. He answered every one directly without evasion, without the particular careful phrasing that men used when they were managing information rather than sharing it. He knew the numbers. He knew the weak points, there were 3, and he identified them before she found them and told her what he had already begun doing about each one. At the end of the hour, she closed the folder. You've been managing this well, she said. Better since March, he said, when someone told me about the grain storage. She looked at him. He almost smiled. She looked away so he wouldn't see her do the same. There are changes I'd want to make, she said. Tell me. The tenant agreements on the South Field are structured badly. The families carrying those agreements are one poor harvest from crisis. The terms need to be adjusted before winter. Agreed, he said. The timber contracts for next year should go back out to competitive bid. Henderson's replacements haven't been properly vetted for that volume of work. Agreed. And the workers' children, she said. There's no provision for them. For schooling. For anything beyond what their parents can manage. She paused. My father was the only education most of the children in Piedmont County received. He taught them alongside the minister's duties unpaid because he believed it was the right thing. I want to do something similar here, not as charity, as investment. He looked at her for a moment. However you want to structure it, he said. You have my full support. She nodded once. Then she was quiet for a moment. Nathaniel, she said. Yes. I need to tell you something I haven't said out loud yet. He waited. I am not an easy person, she said. I know what I think. I say what I know. I will not always agree with you, and when I disagree, I will say so, and I will not be persuaded by anything except a better argument. She paused. I have been alone long enough that my habits are set. I work early and late. I keep my own accounts. I make my own decisions about things in my domain, and I expect to be consulted about things in yours. She looked at him directly. I am telling you this before, not after. Because the man I marry needs to know who he's marrying. He held her gaze. I know who I'm marrying, he said. I spent 11 months watching you. I'm not under any illusions about what you are. Good. And for what it's worth, he said, I'm not an easy person either. I'm quiet in ways that can feel like distance. I solve problems by myself before I ask for help, which I'm working on. He paused. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. When I do, I need you to tell me. I will, she said. I know, he said. That's one of the reasons I asked. She looked at the document folder between them. The honest account of what he had and what he owed and what he was working toward. She thought about the ledger her father had given her when she was 12. Write the numbers honest. She had done that her whole life. She had written the numbers honest and let the truth be whatever it was, and had never, not once, adjusted a figure to make the balance sheet look better than it was. This was the same. The numbers were honest. The account balanced. But The Monday hearing produced formal findings against both Henderson and Hastings. Henderson received a judgment of civil liability for the full amount of redirected goods, plus costs, with criminal charges deferred, pending continued cooperation with the county attorney's investigation into connected parties. Hastings received a civil judgment, immediate removal from the County Supply Commission, and a referral to the county attorney for criminal proceedings on 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. His attorney negotiated through the following week. There would be no trial in the end. The evidence was too complete, the bank records too clear, the consulting fee trail too well documented. Hastings entered a plea to a reduced charge in November and paid restitution to all 4 affected estates. The amount that came back to Carter Estate was $1,430. Elizabeth recorded it in the ledger herself. She wrote the figure in the column where it belonged and drew the line beneath it and added it up and confirmed that the balance was exactly what she had calculated, and she set down her pen and felt the quiet satisfaction of a book that finally properly closed. They married in October, not in the Harlow County Church, which was too large and too public for what they wanted. In the small chapel on the estate grounds that Nathaniel's mother had attended and that had stood empty for 5 years. Aldridge attended. Garrett attended, looking younger than usual and pleased in the way young people look when they have been present for something that mattered. Marcus stood at the back with the expression of a man who had known this was coming before either of the parties did. Mrs. Alderton came. She arrived early, which meant she approved. Carolyn Hastings did not come. Elizabeth had not expected her to. The autumn had been difficult for Caroline in ways that had nothing to do with weddings, but 2 days before a small package had arrived at the estate addressed to Elizabeth. Inside was a pair of white gloves, fine ones, and a note in Caroline's careful hand. For what it's worth, I was wrong about the wrong things and right about nothing that mattered. I hope you are happy. I believe you will be. C.H. Elizabeth kept the note. She wore the gloves. The ceremony was short and honest, which was exactly what both of them had wanted. The minister read the vows. They repeated them. Nathaniel said his without looking away, the way he did everything directly without theater. When it was done, he took her hand, not with ceremony, not with the self-consciousness of a man performing a gesture. Just his hand around hers, the way it had been on that evening at the Whitfield house when she had said once and meant so much more. She held his hand. She did not let go. The estate changed slowly, the way real things change. Not all at once, not with announcement, but degree by degree until one day you looked up and the world was different. The tenant agreements on the South Field were restructured before winter. 3 families who had been one bad harvest from crisis found themselves with terms they could survive, and then with terms they could plan ahead with. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between people who were afraid and people who were not. Briggs turned out to be excellent. Elizabeth worked alongside him for the first 6 months, not managing him but teaching him, and at the end of those 6 months, she handed him the supply records and said, "You know what you're doing. Trust it." He did. The accounts for 1818 were the cleanest Carter estate had produced in a decade. The children's school opened in the spring. It was not a grand thing. A room in the estate's secondary building, a hired teacher from Richmond, a young woman named Abby, who had been looking for exactly this kind of position, and 12 children whose parents had not expected anything like it. Elizabeth visited twice a week. She taught the older children to read ledgers on Friday afternoons. "Why do we need to know this?" one of them asked her once, a girl named Rosie, 11 years old, with the particular alertness of a child who was always slightly ahead of the conversation. "Because numbers tell the truth," Elizabeth said, "and the world needs people who can read it." Rosie thought about that. "What if you read it and nobody listens?" she said. Elizabeth looked at her. "Then you build the case better," she said, "until they can't ignore it." Signed. In the spring of 1819, Prescott offered Elizabeth a formal consulting position with the county attorney's office. She accepted. She told Nathaniel that evening, sitting at the desk in the library, that had become as much hers as his, her books on one side, his on the other, the space between them covered in documents that were always in the process of becoming something clear. "Prescott made it official," she said. "I know," Nathaniel said. "He wrote to me first to ask if I had any objection." She looked at him. "He asked your permission. He asked whether your ongoing work at the estate would create a conflict," Nathaniel said. "I told him your professional obligations were your own, and I had no interest in limiting them." She studied him. "And you didn't tell me he wrote." "You didn't need my approval," he said. "You needed to make your own decision. I wasn't going to muddy that." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the Virginia spring was coming, and the particular smell of red clay warming up after winter, green things pushing through the mockingbird in the oak tree, starting his first practice runs for the season ahead. Inside, two people sat at a desk covered in documents and light, and the comfortable evidence of a life built together from honest materials. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For knowing the difference," she said, "between supporting someone and managing them." He held her gaze. "You taught me," he said. "Somewhere between the 12th and 13th candidate." She looked at her ledger. Something in her chest that had been careful and controlled and professionally maintained for a very long time simply rested, not because the work was done. The work was never done. There would always be another ledger, another fraud to untangle, another family whose numbers needed reading, honestly. There would always be another Rosie asking good questions on a Friday afternoon, another tenant family whose terms needed adjusting before they hit a wall, another young man like Garrett who needed to hear that carrying the documents mattered. There would always be work. But for the first time in Elizabeth Whitmore's life, the work did not have to carry everything else as well. She had something else now, an account that balanced. A man who had looked at everything. She was not the version of her that was useful, not the version that was manageable, but the complete and honest version that kept inconvenient books and said difficult things, and was never going to be anything other than exactly who she was, and had decided without reservation and without conditions that this was the woman he wanted beside him. She picked up her pen. She opened the ledger. She wrote the date at the top of the page the way she always did, clean and clear, because the record of a thing began with knowing when it happened. She wrote the figures. She added them up. The account balanced. It had always been going to balance, she thought. From the moment she set 5 sealed proposals on a desk, and a man looked past all of them and saw her. The numbers had been pointing here all along. She had just needed to read them honest. And from that October morning forward in the estate, on the oak-lined road in Virginia, where the mockingbird sang every summer, and the red clay dried hard in the heat, Elizabeth Whitmore Carter read them honest every single day for her tenants, for her clients, for the children on Friday afternoons, for the county that had once tried to make her small, and the truth she built never once failed to hold. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And now at last the world around her knew it too.